Is the latest M4 iMac the breath of fresh air that Apple really claims it to be, or is it just simply trotting out more of the same? If you listen to Apple, this new M4 iMac is twice as fast as the original M1 Apple Silicon iMac from a few years ago, and nearly 6 times as fast as the most popular Intel-based iMac. So that asks the question, is this the right time for you to buy a new iMac? Who's it for? And also, is this as close to a bargain as you're going to find from Apple? Well, that is what we're going to talk about in this video. If you're new to the channel, my name's David, and I love making videos about Apple gear every week here on the channel just to keep you up to date with what's happening in the world of Apple. One thing is for certain, this iMac is still as gorgeous as ever. Now, I know that might sound like an odd place to start this video at, but the iMac has always been the most iconic and the best looking Mac of all Macs. Put an iMac in front of somebody and they'll immediately tell you that that is a Mac that they're looking at. And no matter what's going on under the skin these days and how much it's developed, and we'll be getting into that, there's no doubting that this is still one hell of a gorgeous Mac to look at. Oddly though, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Just because it looks so pretty and it's such a good looking Mac, often it's confused with being not a serious Mac, not a Mac you can use properly day to day as a workhorse. But I tell you what, pull back the skin and underneath the beautiful exterior of this iMac is a real workhorse just waiting to be tapped into. The iMac for many of us is kind of like a gateway Mac. It's the Mac we often first own. It wasn't actually the first Mac that I first owned. That was the first Mac that I first owned, a little MacBook Air. But I'd only been working on that for probably a few months when I decided I wanted a full desktop experience. And that's when I started to work on iMac. And I reckon that was probably about 2013, 2014, so 10 years ago. And I worked on iMacs exclusively for all of those years, through until just a couple of years ago when I switched to working on the M1 Max MacBook Pro. But you know what, that 27-inch iMac that I spent so many years on, so many hours working on, that is the Mac that I've still got the greatest affinity and the greatest love affair with. Sadly, it now sits at home, lonely in the studio there, gathering dust. That beautiful 5K Retina display is useless to me, which begs the question, will ever Apple bring back Target Display? It makes so much sense, surely. Although the iMac received a complete head-to-tail makeover in 2021, somehow, with the design, they still managed to make it look like an iMac. I don't know if it was the stand or that chin, the contentious chin that got so much discussion when it was relaunched a few years ago, but I happen to love it. And I tell you why, not only because I think it looks lovely, it just is a little throwback, a little nod to nostalgia. It just makes it look like an iMac, and I love it for that. The M4 iMac lineup comes in 6 colours: blue, purple, pink, orange, yellow, silver and green, which, as I mentioned, is the colour that I picked up. And when Apple reintroduced colours to the iMac range a few years ago, it's clear what their thought process was. They were saying, look, this is a Mac that's designed at consumers. It's not for prosumers or professional use. This is the Mac for everybody. It's the Mac for most people. Now, I get it, and I happen to really like the colours, but the only downer is it adds this misbelief that this Mac is just too pretty to be taken seriously, that it's a Mac that's going to sit on reception desks or on kitchen countertops, or it's a Mac that only is any use for kids and grandparents, whereas, honestly, that is so far from the truth. M4 Apple Silicon has blown my mind. It's almost as much of a revolution to me as when I started using Apple Silicon with that M1 Max MacBook Pro. And in fact, I love using M4 Apple Silicon so much, I've now pretty much kind of retired my M1 Max MacBook Pro, and I'm doing everything. All of my work is on the M4 Pro Mac Mini. Of course, the iMac doesn't get the option of the M4 Pro chip, but it does have a faster, snappier CPU, which just seems to make everything feel quicker. It's one of the benefits I found of using M4 Apple Silicon. The graphics have also been given a boost as well via an improved 8 or 10 core GPU with hardware accelerated ray tracing, which delivers unbelievably realistic graphics and makes gaming on this M4 iMac that one stage closer, a little bit more of a dream come true. 16 gigs, of course, is now standard. It's where memory starts across the entire Apple Silicon range. So we do have something to thank Apple Silicon for. But if you fancy and you really think you're going to be using this iMac heavily in future years, you can spec it up with either 24 or 32 gigs of memory as well. The iMac I bought is the base level iMac. It's just got the 16 gigs of memory and only 256 gigs of storage on it. Now, the 256 gigs of storage isn't a lot, but it's fine for me. I know it's going to be fine for me because this isn't going to be my main workstation. But don't get caught up on numbers. If you're coming from an Intel iMac and you're thinking of buying a new M4 iMac, 16 gigs of memory is more than enough for, you've guessed it, most people. Talking of storage, I'm going to cover that more fully later on in the video because it's quite a hot subject and quite contentious. So I'll go over that in more detail a little bit later on. These new M4 iMacs get a new media encoding engine. They also get a ProRes encode and decode engine as well. So if you think you're going to get into editing multiple streams of 4K video, this new iMac will see you smoothly through that as well. Couple that with the fact that it's also got a new 16-core neural engine that will eventually assist with Apple Intelligence, and couple that with 120 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth, and there's honestly not much this iMac can't handle, again, for most people. Looking back when I got my first iMac, I didn't realize it at the time, but what really hooked me into it was the Retina display. There's no denying, once you've started working on one of Apple's Retina displays, you're spoiled. There's no going back. Doing everything on an iMac just looks better. It just feels better. It becomes a bit more an event. And that's true now on this M4 iMac. Here you get a 24-inch 4.5K display with a 4480 by 2520 resolution at 218 pixels per inch. Brightness. Now, it's bright enough. It's got 500 nits of brightness. To put some context on these figures so you kind of understand where it sits, if you've got an iPad mini, it's the same brightness as that. The only big difference here, of course, is you're not going to be taking your iMac, I doubt, to work out in direct sunshine and in daylight. So 500 nits of brightness is more than enough. And again, to give it some idea, my studio display that I absolutely love working on, well, that's only got 600 nits of brightness, and I've never felt that looks dull or tired. 500 nits in a room environment, in an indoor environment, is just fine. The Retina display with its P3 wide color is clear, crisp, punching, vibrant. It has over 1 billion colors, meaning everything you're looking at on the screen just zings, just pops, it just jumps out of the screen at you. It is so realistic to use. These Retina displays are just perfect. The basic 8-core CPU that I've got in my iMac will only support one external display, but if you jump up to the iMacs that have got a 10-core CPU, well, they will support 2 external displays up to 6K resolution at 60 Hz or one 8K resolution, if you can find one, again at 60 Hz. This year, Apple has lent really heavily into their Nano-texture finish. Now, I tried it firsthand on my iPad Pro last year and decided it wasn't for me, but that was just a personal choice. What Nano-texture sets out to do, it does really, really well. It gets rid of virtually all reflections. So if you're working in a very bright office or you're stuck working by a window, the £200 option to put it on your iMac may well be an option worth considering. It's available on all of the iMacs apart from the basic one that I've got. And for all of those of you that I know are going to be making comment in a video about when are we going to get a 27-inch iMac, I just don't see it happening. It just doesn't make sense anymore. Right now, you can go and buy a Mac Studio or Mac Mini and hook it up to the Studio display. And let's face it, the Studio display is basically an iMac display. And the other great rub of going that way is that probably your display is going to outlast your Mac. So eventually, it might actually end up saving you money. And if this is the first of my videos you come across, welcome to the channel. I love making these weekly videos about everything Apple. And for that to carry on, I just need your help. And you know what I'm going to say? Hit that subscribe button. It makes a massive difference. It really does. It just helps the channel to grow. It helps YouTube to put the videos in front of new people, more faces, and the quicker the channel grows. And we had a great year last year, and I'm looking for more growth this year. The more videos I can bring you and the more gear I can review for you. So if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, do, and also turn on notifications. That makes a huge difference as well. It means that the moment I upload a video, you are the first to know. Now, you do get some extras on this iMac. You get an improved 12 megapixel center stage camera. Now, center stage is one of those things I'm not particularly keen on. At best, it's vague, and at its worst, it's just damn right annoying. The camera is also, it tends to over smooth, I think, and the colors are just a little bit too saturated for my liking. You do get desk view as well, which is something I've never used and I nearly always forget is there. But the good news is you have got a camera built into this iMac. So if you just need to make the occasional video call, at least you've got the camera there without having to go to the expense of getting another third-party camera to use. And also it can record in up to 1080p for video recording as well. Now, as you may have gathered from that, I'm not a massive fan of the camera on the iMac or on any Mac come to that. But when it comes to the speakers and the mics, well, that is a different story. Apple claims these mics are studio quality, and that might be pushing it just a little bit, but for built-in mics, they're actually surprisingly good. The M4 iMac gets a 3-mic array with a high signal-to-noise ratio and what they call directional beamforming. Basically, it cuts out a lot of the background noise and focuses heavily on your voice. And as I said, they're actually really good. I've already shown you what the colours are like on the camera from the iMac, a little bit oversaturated and certainly oversmoothed, I think. This is now recording in QuickTime. I've set the camera on the iMac to maximum, which means it's recording in 1080p. I'm sitting around about 12 inches away from the mic on the iMac to give you an idea of what it sounds like in a reasonably treated studio. And the first part of this recording, I've got the microphone set to standard. And I'm now going to switch over to voice isolation to hear what difference that makes. So now I've turned the mic on the iMac over to voice isolation. There is a heater running in the background because it's really cold in the studio today, so it'd be interesting to hear when we play this back if you could originally hear the heater and if it's now kind of knocked out some of that HVAC and background noise that the voice isolation is supposed to do. And carrying along with the theme of possibly saving you money, the speakers on here are decent. They really are decent. If you're just a casual listener who plays podcasts or music while you're working, then these speakers will not offend. There's 2 pairs of force-cancelling woofers and 2 tweeters, which give plenty of decent mids and actually a nice dash of bass as well. They're fine to listen to all day without offending, and as is pretty much standard practice now for Apple, you also get spatial audio with support for Dolby Atmos as well. On the back, let's put it this way, Apple isn't exactly generous with their I/O. On the back of my iMac, I've just got a pair of Thunderbolt 4 ports. If I wanted to add in a gigabit Ethernet connection, that would have cost me an extra £30, but on the Macs higher up the range, that option comes as standard. But again, keeping in line with where Apple wanted this iMac to appear in their range, Thunderbolt 5 didn't even get a look in on the iMac range this time around. Unlike that ridiculous design on the back of the studio display where the power cable isn't removable, on the back of the iMac it is. On here you get a colour-coded braided cable that is actually super generous in length with a snappy magnetic connector. It's kind of, think of it like the MagSafe for Mac. On the side, you get a 3.5mm headphone jack, which will handle high impedance headphones. So if you want to get the best audio out of your iMac, that is the route to go. And as you would probably expect of any new M4 Mac, it's got the latest connectivity with Wi-Fi 6E if your router supports it and Bluetooth 5.3. What else is inside the box? Actually, not an awful lot. Apple is really leaning into this idea of keeping their packaging lean. But can we just take a moment to look at how beautiful the clamshell design on this box is? It is beautiful. Inside the box, all you get is the color match keyboard and mouse. Both of these now charge via USB-C, and you get the included braided color match cable as well. And if you want a trackpad or a keyboard with Finger ID, they are extras. A little bit earlier on, I said I was going to get into storage more fully, so let's talk about that now. Internal SSDs tend to be the most convenient and the quickest to work from. If you want to go the external route on this iMac, don't forget you've only got 40 gigabytes of data transfer speed, and that might be an issue for you. Now, it obviously depends on what you're going to be using your external SSDs for. If it's just for backing up or for taking some data onto or occasionally off from, you'll probably be okay. But if you want to work with it more meaningfully through the course of the day, that's where you could run into issues. And also, I found that some external SSDs have a lot of issues with thermal throttling. So that brings us back to Apple's internal storage and buying at the point of purchase. Yes, it's convenient. Yes, it's quick. But by God, do they charge you for that privilege. Jumping from the 256 gigs that I've got, which is barely going to be enough for anybody except for the lightest user. If you go up to 512 gigs, that's going to cost you another £200. The 1 terabyte option costs £400. And if you want 2 terabytes of Apple SSD inside your iMac, it is going to cost you £800. We know they love to make money, and that is why pretty soon they're likely to be the first company valued at $4 trillion. So the convenience of Apple SSD is great, but it is expensive. I'm going to be talking about storage and external SSDs a little bit more over the coming weeks, so don't forget, make sure you've got subscribed. I've already mentioned how M4 Apple Silicon just seems to be making everything a little bit smoother and that little bit quicker. And it's also true they brought iPhone and Mac closer together. When they released macOS Sequoia this year, they introduced something called iPhone mirroring. And if you haven't tried it yet, you are missing out. It is ingenious, a real quality of life improvement. It genuinely is. Many days now, I don't touch my iPhone through the course of the day. Once you've got it set up, you can transfer files, you can transfer videos, you can transfer photos. It's just like drag and drop. Honestly, set up iPhone mirroring on your Mac. It really is so worth it. This is the second Mac that I use the Apple trade-in option for, and it works really, really well. It is so quick to set up and do. I checked before going into London on how much they're going to give me for my year-old M3 iMac, which is £285. I was okay with that, and I checked on availability as well. As soon as you get into store, all you have to do is scan a QR code that the assistant shows you. That gives them temporary access to your iCloud account, and the device is registered to your iCloud account. They then get the serial number and you're done. But travel light. Honestly, they don't want anything. Originally, I used to go in with the box and the charging bricks. They don't want it. This time around, they didn't even ask for the mouse or the keyboard, let alone the charger or the box. Just take the actual device itself. It's all they want, but it actually works really well, and it's a really easy and convenient way to trade on. So, who is this M4 iMac really aimed at? Personally, I can't see a time when I wouldn't have an iMac somewhere in my lineup, somewhere in my studio. Yes, I don't use it heavily these days. It will really only be used for browsing and for emailing. But that's because I'm spoiled for choice. It's not a reflection on the iMac. These latest M4 iMacs are every bit the equal of the much praised Mac Minis, the M4 Mac Minis. Except with this iMac, you get a Retina display, you get a mouse, and you get a keyboard. Now, if we look at the entry price of the iMac and the entry price of the Mac Mini, in my logic, that basically means you're getting a Retina display, a mouse and a keyboard for £700. That makes it value for money in my eyes. These iMacs are not only a great way to get into the Mac ecosystem or to learn how to use Mac OS, they're just a great Mac. If you want to run your business off one of these iMacs, you can do it. If you want to edit in Photoshop, Lightroom, edit video in Final Cut or audio in Logic, these iMacs will handle it easily. These iMacs shouldn't be pigeonholed as some pretty colourful little plaything. They are every bit as much of a Mac as the next Mac. Take the skin off, there's an M4 Apple Silicon inside just waiting to be used. Buy a well-spec'd iMac today and it will last you for years into the future. Now, Apple made a big play that these iMacs are Apple Intelligent ready. And yes, quite likely they are. What we've seen of Apple Intelligence so far is A, a bit of a mess, and B, doesn't really appeal to me or is of much use to me. I was looking forward to the writing tools. They haven't been all that good, if I'm honest. But don't go and buy an iMac purely because of what it could be in the future. Go and buy an iMac because of what it is today. A great computer that will see you through years and years of good service. You can still unpack and be online with this M4 iMac in under an hour. And it's every bit as much of an iMac today as it's always been, chin and all. I happen to love it, and you know what? I think a certain Steve Jobs would as well. This iMac once saved Apple from bankruptcy, and today it remains an iconic Mac at the top of its game and essential to their Mac lineup as ever. And if you're wondering what the difference between M4 Apple Silicon is and M4 Pro Apple Silicon, take a look at the video that's on screen now. It explains it all.